and welcome to Simple Blind Luck. I am Blind Luck, and I'll be your guide dog on our little adventure. Alrighty, folks, today's another special episode. I want to highlight a really cool car. Now, a little while ago, I did a video on the SLP Firehawk, which was really cool car. Today, I'll be going over another really cool car, but this came straight from Pontiac. And I will be talking about the 1973 to 74 Pontiac Trans Am SD 455. So I'll be talking about the Super Duty. I'm going to get one kind of controversial thing out the way quick. I personally think that this early second generation Firebird is gorgeous. I think it's one of the best looking designs. Now, I know a lot of people have love for the later second generation, like the 77, 78, the Bandit Trans Ams, and I'm throwing no shade at those whatsoever. I like them too. I personally just kind of prefer these earlier second gen ones, especially the Super Duty. It's gorgeous. So with that out the way, let's get into some of the meat and potatoes here. Most gearheads can tell you that early going into mid 70s, not really a great time for performance on cars at all. And there are several factors for this. One of which is there was actually a bit of an oil crisis going on, at least for Western countries. And when you have oils kind of in short supply, it translates to gas being in short supply. And obviously, when you've got a commodity in high demand but low supply, it starts getting expensive. Well, when that kind of thing is prolonged, like it was then, people start looking towards more economical vehicles. So people started shifting more towards your 4, 6 cylinders economy cars. They're not going to be paying for some big muscle car that gets 8, 10 miles to the gallon. So that played a bit of a role in it. The largest role that contributed to it was the EPA started really getting stricter on emission regulations. Now, we had cars in the late 60s, like the glory days for the muscle cars, that were pushing 11, 12, 13 to 1 compression ratios. And they dropped all the way down to, 8 to 1 on average. And the problem with this is, you can get that big V8 to comply with the emissions by dropping the compression ratio like that. However, they at that time could not comply with emissions as well as have good performance at the same time. You kind of had to pick and choose. So lowering the compression ratios to comply with emissions really hampered the performance of a lot of these vehicles. Another factor I will bring up, but I personally don't subscribe to it, I just don't think it really played a role in it whatsoever, is this is also the time in which the way in which horsepower was measured was changed. It went from a gross horsepower rating to a net horsepower rating. And with this new rating, power numbers dropped. The reason I don't really feel like this plays a factor is they simply changed the way they measured it. the car didn't change. It's kind of like, say you've got a plank of wood and you need to cut it. Well, for years and years, you've used some old beat up ruler to measure it before you cut it. Now you've gotten a brand new fancy dancy tape measure. Now, whether you were using the tape measure or the old ruler, it doesn't change the piece of wood or the engine in this scenario. Really, all it means is, if anything, you've got a more accurate way of measuring it. But I understand how people think, because they see numbers drop. So in their head, well, the car's slower. When in reality, the car didn't change whatsoever. It was simply the way in which horsepower was measured changed. So now that I got all of that out the way, let's see what was so special about this Super Duty. Why is it so great and wonderful? Well, the little devious minds at Pontiac saw all these regulations and weren't happy with it, because they knew the car's performance going to drop, and they got to looking and they found a little bitty loophole, a bit of a gray area, and they decided to exploit it. They discovered that some of their older engines were sort of grandfathered in, and they didn't have to meet quite as strict regulations as their typical engines at that time would. So they started looking through the old parts bin, and they got their older 455 big block out and kind of dusted it off a little bit and decided to shoehorn that inside one of the Trans Ams. But they weren't quite content with that. They kind of went through and overhauled this engine. So now it's got like a 4-bolt main, it's got forged rods, pistons. They really threw all the performance part bins at it they could. And they wound up with a car over 300 horsepower, roughly 310 to 315 horsepower, and could do the quarter mile in about a 13.7. And there was even one account of a journalist that managed a 13.5 second quarter mile time out of it. And these are along with some about a 5.7 second 0 to 60. Now, some accounts is like a 5.4 second, some 5.7. I'm sure it really depends on how good of a driver you are as to what number you're going to get. Now, in comparison, say your Mustang, Camaro, and even the Challenger, they were all right around the same as far as their base V8s with like a 2-barrel at the time were about 170, 180 horsepower, and their higher end top dog motors were about 270, 275. And the 73 Mustang Mach 1 with the Cobra Jet 351 Cobra Jet engine was about the fastest other muscle car you could get at the time, and it had like a 8.9 second 0 to 60 versus 5.4, 5.7. That's a pretty big gap. And it did a little better that Mach 1 on the quarter mile was in low to mid 14 second range, but as you know, that's still not mid 13s. That's a pretty big disparity to have there. Now, all of this wasn't so wonderful though. this performance that Pontiac threw in, it came with quite a hefty price. The Super Duty Trans Ams, which you could get as either Trans Am or Firebird Formula, which you may recall from the previous episode about the Firehawk, that they also had a formula, which means you got all the performance goodies, you just didn't get as pretty of an interior and some of the aesthetic things. It's more of the bargain-minded car. So if you got the Super Duty Trans Am, you were looking at just a hair over $5,000 in 73. Now, by comparison, say the top Mustang, Camaro, Challenger, you're looking roughly in the $3,500, $3,600 range. So it's quite a bit more expensive. So a lot of people weren't too keen on shelling out that much more money. Although the ones that did, that held on to that Super Duty, are probably pretty proud of that. Because although that car cost about $5,000 in 73, 74, one in clean condition now is a six-figure car. It's a little over $100,000 for a nice one. Not to mention, you get a bit of exclusivity, given that they only produce just a hair over 1,300 SD 455 cars. So there's not very many around. So you could have a really, really rare bird when it comes to that. But I just wanted to highlight it. I don't think it gets the love it deserves. Let me know in the comments, what do you think about the 73, 74 Super Duty? Did you even know about it? What do you think about it? Do you think the $106,000 price tag on one now is worth it? I mean, I kind of think that's underrated, but you know, I'm kind of a fanboy for them. But with that, I will hear you later.